do some more practice expanding logarithms. We'll take some time with each step. So let's look at the first one. Why don't you, first of all, noting the division, write this as a difference of 2 logs. You should have this step written down. If you don't, please get started. You'll notice that I took this square root again and wrote it as a power of 1/2. Now I want to look at that second term. I see we have multiplication here. That means we can write that second term as a sum of 2 logs. Why don't you write that step down? Now, if this is what you have, it's not quite correct because remember, we are subtracting all of that second term. That means when I expand it, I have to subtract all of this. So you may have written it as log base 3, oops, I forgot my 1/2 there, of x squared plus 1 to the power of 1/2 minus log base 3 of x to the power of 5 minus log base 3 of x plus 1 to the power of 4. In fact, it's worth noting here that any factors found at the bottom of the argument will always be terms that are subtracted. So you can see I'm subtracting log base 3 of x to the power of 5, and I'm subtracting log base 3 of x plus 1 to the power of 4. Remember the final step that we had here? It was always to write these powers as factors. So your final expansion of this logarithm should have 3 logs. It should look like this. Why don't you try the next one? You first noticed the division and wrote this as a difference of 2 logarithms. You noted that there were powers that could be written as factors. And finally, you remembered that property that I suggested you memorize. The natural log of e is equal to 1. So we had minus x times 1, or just subtract x. Now let me be clear that this final answer cannot be simplified any further. You cannot factor out x. If we were writing brackets in here, they would go right here and say you have to evaluate this logarithm and then subtract x. We don't want those brackets there, but we understand that that is the order to evaluate this in. Okay, this looks like a great question. Why don't you try it out? In your first step, you noticed the division and wrote this as a difference of logarithms. In the next step, you noticed that you had multiplication in the first term, so you wrote that as a sum of logarithms. And I also noticed, I hope you noticed as well, that this argument could be factored, and so I did so. Finally, you took all of those powers and wrote them as factors. No one of these questions is done in exactly the same way. So that's why you need to spend enough time that you encounter all of the different possibilities and are able to easily expand logarithms. In the next lecture, we want to look at condensing logarithms.